glad that we had such engaging conversations. I kind of popped in and to the rest of the groups, and it seemed like everybody's doing pretty well in their sessions. So I just want to kind of wrap up today by summarizing what we talked about in each of the groups. So first thing we want to talk about is group 1, imposter syndrome and first generation status. Somebody from that group want to give us a summary?
Sure, yeah, I'll jump in and start. So we definitely talked about the effects of imposter syndrome, which can include, the fear of messing up or second guessing your own accomplishments, the thought of having to be perfect and, having no room to make mistakes. And one of the things that can kind of help with imposter syndrome is representation of those individuals that look like you in the field, but also, seeking out other individuals outside of, your field that have also possibly, traversed a similar path that you can relate to, that you can bounce ideas off of, or just, vent to. All that can help with imposter syndrome. One of the takeaways I heard from was, jumping from, undergrad to grad school can kind of build this sense of like, oh man, do I belong here? And that can stem from, you possibly being the only minority in the lab, or it can stem from, an age difference between you coming from an undergrad degree, roughly in your early 20s for most of us, being in a lab where there's graduate students, some of them in the late 20s, early 30s. So that can bring about that sense of maybe I don't belong here. And ways to combat that would be to, like we mentioned earlier, finding those mentors, and even as a grad student, trying to reach back to those, whether if you're in the PhD field, reaching back to those master's students, or as a master's student, reaching back to those undergrads, and kind of doing a peer-to-peer check-in. I think that goes a long way, just checking in with those newer students in the research lab, just asking them how do they feel that they're doing. Are there any issues that have arisen within them that they want to confide in you in, and maybe you can share a story that can then help them get over that hurdle. Talea mentioned celebrating small wins, which is, I think, just at any point in education, we can all relate to being able to have those small, or someone give you those small compliments, can be the difference in like, a man, I don't know if I'm cut out for this kind of day, or like, oh yeah, okay, I got this, I'm ready to push through and move forward. And with that came about the conversation of being a first generation graduate. So one of the things that can stem from being a first generation graduate is the pressure to live up to a certain idea that maybe your family has placed on you, or maybe even friends might have placed on you. Being able to combat that is very important. And ways that we talked about to combat that is talking, reaching out, finding a mentor, like I mentioned previously, in your research lab or outside of your field and altogether. Someone that has trekked a similar path in academia or higher education that you can confide in. Someone that can share their experiences with you, which will allow you to relate a little bit more. Did I miss anything, guys and ladies?
I think you covered it.
Great, thanks, David. The next group we had talking about implicit, explicit bias and lack of role models. You want to do a summary for us?
Yeah, I can take this one. So we talked a lot about sort of the overlap of these two things as well as them separately. And starting with implicit and explicit bias, understanding that, especially for implicit bias, that everyone has them, and recognizing positions of power being being able to be uncomfortable and sit in moments where you have had a misstep, or helping others around you do that as well. Being humble and communicating in these situations. We talked about the benefit of top-down encouragement, so coming from either university level or department level. But then we also talked about sometimes how that can seem like it may be busy work or just another thing to do, or institutions covering themselves as opposed to like a genuine training. So we talked about potential ways around that, like participating in formalized courses and trainings, and trying to with each person in different positions of power, bring in people to the circle and to the conversation that wouldn't necessarily buy into it by themselves. With that, we did also talk about the other side of tone policing and balancing energy and conversations with people who are willing to have these conversations versus those that don't initially seem. So it's definitely a balance of meeting people where they're at, but also respecting boundaries. In terms of lack of role models, we had some conversation about how to be a role model or a mentor for someone who doesn't necessarily look like you. The conversation came up between, for BIPOC students, the balance between visibility and wanting to provide mentorship or be a role model for other people, and then also taking on too much. So being cognizant of that balance. And we talked about mentoring at all roles. So having people that are on the same levels mentoring, and kind of widening the pool of mentors and role models that way, instead of just reaching up and looking above. And we also talked about different ways to create an environment and like a team of support for students, so that it doesn't always fall on one person, or that other people that are involved in people's lives can provide that support as well. And then we also talked about, from the top down, also efforts in mentoring being more rewarded and recognized. So mentoring and role model, to kind of merge those together. But yeah, I don't know if I missed anything or if anyone else wants to add.
No, I thought that was great. I like the idea of team mentorship instead of just having a single role model. That might ease the burden a little bit. Okay, and the last group talked about lack of cultural awareness and tokenism.
Yeah, so when we talked about tokenism, a big thing that came up was highlighting how it's not just having a small amount of minority students, but also their treatment. So you can have a small amount of students, but if you treat them as their only representation in your department, then that's when it becomes a problem. And then that kind of ties into lack of cultural awareness. And we talked about how they both stem from a lack of education. So for actionable items, we kind of talked about, one, having support systems for students. So promoting student organizations, but also promoting greater efforts to get to know people. And so maybe we wouldn't have this large amount of tokenism if you understood that one person doesn't represent a whole group, because you actually get to know them as a person and an individual. So social gatherings at the faculty and student level, team building activities, but also mentorship. So culturally aware mentorship, but also encouraging mentors to speak up for their students, because sometimes you have that power imbalance where you don't feel comfortable as a student bringing up something or confronting someone who is in a higher position than you. And also training both mentors and instructors, because things do typically happen in the classroom. So being able to call people out when things are happening, or also as an instructor, not looking at the one person of color in your classroom when you're talking about a topic that involves their culture.
Great, thank you so much, Skylar. Those are all great and powerful things. And I keep hearing the word mentorship mentioned here. And so, you know, we can keep talking about mentorship a little bit later. So I'm going to wrap up here for the sake of time. I just want to quickly thank you guys all for the productive discussion, and a special thank you to our moderators. You guys did an amazing job, and I really appreciate your help. We know there's a lot of work to be done to dismantle some of these systemic barriers, but we just want to encourage everyone to again, continue these conversations. take what you've heard here, try to apply it at your own institutions or your own, community groups. And I'll be posting the action items that we came up with in our documents on the Slack, so we can, you guys can have that for future use and you can review it. And we also want to encourage you guys to keep talking about this on Twitter. We have a hashtag, and also in our Slack channel, we can keep talking about some of these discussions, like, for example, how do we build these mentorship pipelines? All right, well, that's all for our session. Just want to make sure that you guys all attend the closing and award ceremony. We're going to have especially some interesting talks about what we're doing next for the Black Biomechanics Association. So if you guys want to hear more about that or be a part of that, make sure you come to the closing and award ceremony. And then we'll also be at the after party on Spatial Chat if you want to have a more personal conversation with any of us right after the closing ceremony. So thank you guys all for attending. I appreciate it so much. I'll see you soon.